I'm joined again by my partner, Frank Morano. Hi, Frankie. How you doing?
I'm doing great, John. How are you?
So, Frank, there's some dirty business going on in the politics game here. And it sure looked like to me when Bernie Sanders said he was going to suspend his campaign, but he was going to remain on the ballot in many of the primary states so that he could still continue to amass delegates and then they could have a stronger voice for the platforms when they get to the convention. New York tried to pull a quick one and cancel the primary. You got some news on that things are changing.
Well, it's not necessarily my news to have, but it certainly is interesting. And it's a story I've been following very closely. So basically, the state legislature shoves into the budget, a provision that allows the Board of Elections to cancel their primary if enough candidates withdraw. Right. Basically, it was never the law before. They shoved this into the budget, which would affect this year. They don't even say it'll start 4 years from now. It'll start this year. So these candidates already qualified for the ballot. They already spent a lot of money and an enormous amount of organizing resources qualifying for the ballot, and they get on the ballot. Even though Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang, and others suspended their campaign, they all said, look, we still want to participate. We want to rack up delegates. We want to have an influence on the party platform. And you know what? A lot of people in New York registered Democrat just to vote in this primary. They didn't want the election canceled either. The Board of Elections says they're canceling it. The governor, who, by the way, has already canceled 6 elections so far and a number of other things, he says he's not going to second guess the Board of Elections. But Andrew Yang went to federal court to force them to have this election. And as of yesterday, a federal judge has said, no, this is completely unconstitutional. The election has to go forward. So now the Board of Elections is appealing rather than simply do what Andrew Cuomo suggested yesterday and try to have most people vote by absentee ballot. But you can bet this is going to be something we see play out around the country in a number of different states.
Frank, is there, in your view, I mean, I know you're an old hand, you're young, but you're an old hand at local politics. I mean, isn't there much to do about nothing with this mail-in voting? I mean, we already have the apparatus in place where anyone in America can vote by mail.
Well, you're right. You're right, John. But the fact of the matter is, the incidents of voter fraud that we have seen around the country do tend to be in absentee ballots and voting by mail. Now, I'm all for voting by mail if it's going to keep people safe, but you have to be honest about the fact that there is more of a likelihood of voter fraud. One of the things that I'd love to explore more, I don't know that we're going to get there this year, but maybe next year and 2 years from now, because chances are we'll see pandemics like this again in the future, is something you're very familiar with, and that's blockchain voting. I don't see any reason why we couldn't start doing tests of different blockchain voting systems around the city and around the country to see how things will turn out. And we can have a very controlled pilot program in contests that wouldn't have their outcome affected by any degree of hacking or voter fraud, and see if we can make elections conducted via smartphone, which we do everything from buy stocks with, to pay bills, to buy airline tickets, to a number of other things, if we can make these elections hacker-proof using the blockchain.
You know, it's funny you say that, Frank, because, there have been a couple of trial runs in small elections, like out in Utah. They use this company, Votes. And blockchain is this emerging technology that the government doesn't really want to hear about because it could be applied to so many ways, smart contracts. It could take, fraud out of the government contracting process. But it's been my allegation for a long time that even though most states are on electronic voting, it still leaves a lot to be desired, because when you scan those forms, you don't know where the records are going. And with the blockchain, it makes an indelible permanent record that can never be changed. And if it's changed, there's a record of the change. So maybe, this is a way towards the future, but I don't think we're going to get there just yet.
I think you're right on both counts, but I don't see any reason why we can't start some pilot programs. There's going to be some local elections, maybe some primary contests where, again, it's such a narrow group that we're looking at to see if we can make it hacker proof. I think it's something that, look, this is not going to be the first election, or excuse me, it's not going to be the last election that takes place under a major crisis that makes voting something dangerous. Just recently, look at what we've seen. We've seen September 11th, which took place on primary day in New York. We've seen Hurricane Sandy, which happened 6 days before a presidential election. And you can bet that did hamper turnout in states that were affected by Hurricane Sandy. And now here we have this coronavirus pandemic. I don't think this is the last thing that we're going to see.
So just to shift gears a little bit, Frank, I'm getting a lot of viewer submissions about de Blasio encouraging people to send in photos of people that don't look like they're social distancing. And it seems like there's this new thing emerging, like COVID shaming. Have you seen any of these submissions that are going to the mayor on the COVID shaming?
Well, I heard that a number of them are not real submissions and that they're more pranks and people sending in images of genitalia and things like that. So if this is what the mayor had in mind for this COVID shaming hotline, it doesn't seem as if it's really doing the job as effectively as he'd hoped.
Right. And then I know you've been, I think that is actually a referendum on his suggestion. I know you've been a big advocate in your political career of, referendums and, ranked choice voting. Maybe the people are telling him to leave him alone about shaming others.
Well, look, I came to a very important decision recently, and about 10 days ago, the mayor announced that he was appointing a New York City Charter Revision Commission, and I'm trying to get appointed to that Charter Revision Commission to advocate for things like ranked choice voting and a number of other electoral reforms. So I am not going to criticize the mayor publicly until I don't get picked for this commission. And then, boy, will I have plenty.
Okay. So you're sheltering yourself. You're holding back from being critical of the mayor because you're hopeful that you can get on the New York City Charter Revision Committee.
That's right. I'm hopeful, but not terribly optimistic. Fingers crossed. We'll see what happens. I would be remiss, John, if I did not mention somebody that ran for the job that the mayor has now, and somebody that is a household name to many of our viewers and has left an indelible impact on the world of talk radio, talk television, and journalism in general, and especially New York politics for the last 6 decades. And that's Barry Farber, who unfortunately passed away yesterday at the age of 90. A lot of folks that are watching us right now, they need to appreciate that we couldn't even really be doing what we do but for the fact that Barry Farber had pioneered this format. And he ran for mayor in 1977 against Ed Koch and Mario Cuomo, and almost did better than the Republican candidate running that year, even though he was in the general election as the Conservative Party candidate. And he ran for Congress against Bella Abzug, certainly a legend in her own right. And if you look at the transcripts of those debates between Barry Farber and Mario Cuomo and Ed Koch, or read the descriptions of those debates between Barry Farber and Bella Abzug. I mean, this wasn't the kind of mishegas we see these days. These were debates. I mean, these were intellectual giants, and Barry's going to be missed. Certainly, he was a good friend to me personally, but even if I'd never met him, this was one of the most extraordinary people that ever lived. Spoke over a dozen languages, a prolific author, was one of the most well-traveled men ever, grew up Jewish in North Carolina, which could not have been easy, came to New York and pioneered talk radio in New York with a very very North Carolina accent, which couldn't have been easy, and was a U.S. Army veteran. So I'm going to miss him, but I suspect even though I knew him, I won't be the only one watching that'll miss him.
All right. Well, God bless Barry Farber, and I know, Frank, that's somebody you really looked up to over the years. I know he's one of your inspirations because for those of you watching at home who don't know, Frank is a world-renowned radio host and interviewer. He has a podcast, Morano Anywhere. He's on Sunday mornings here in New York on AM 970, The Answer, or Morano in the Morning. And he's heard every single day, Monday to Friday, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern, on the Joe Piscopo Show, where he's the producer and he double times as part of the cast. And, God bless Barry Farber. And Frankie, stick with us. We're going to take a quick break right here. We're going to come back with a little more Liquid Lunch after this. I want to wish a very happy birthday to my good buddy, Frank Gargano. And I got his hat right here from Shot Shaver Golf. Julia Gargano from American Idol's brother, another stud in his own right. Quick break, back at you right after this.